Wonderful. Thank you, Brittany. Thanks for taking care of us and making sure we're good to go this morning. My name's Shanna. I'm so thrilled that you're all joining us and watching everyone join in, and our numbers are growing. We've got a great group here today. As Brittany said, we are joining today to wrap up a 3-point series in regard to mental health, and we dove even more deeply on the aspect of anxiety and how it plays out in instructional settings. So we're going to wrap up today with some real nitty-gritty strategic practices that can help you as an instructor help your students to cope with their own mental health situations as they're learning in their classrooms. So I'm saying hello with my visual today, just so you know to whom you are speaking. But I'm going to be losing that visual just to share our bandwidth. So I'll say hello and say goodbye in that way. And we'll get rolling. Thanks to everyone for chiming in on the chat. Brittany's right. I love the chat. I love to see comments rolling in. So just use it at any point in time. Don't even wait to be invited. If you have any thoughts, anything to add, that allows us to have a rolling conversation as opposed to you just hearing from me. And let's practice that right now. So I have on here what I'd call a wellness wheel. There are many different variations of this. This is a tool that I use to check in with people of all ages in my sessions. So as you look at this wheel, think, is there an aspect of life, something going on with you that you'd like to share with the group? Maybe this can just be a stream of good news or of items to put our intention on in support of you. Let's go ahead and have that good news coming our way. So if you see any wedge of this wheel, be it intellectual, occupational, or whatnot, and you have something to share, something to report to the group, that will help us build our sense of community and see how everyone's doing this morning. So let's take time to do that and see what we get. I'm going to share my good news. So I'm a mom of 4 and school is wrapping up. And I don't know about all of you, I get really excited about the thought of less structured days and summer. We're very lucky that way. I also feel a little anxious at the idea of less structured days and all these kiddos hanging around as I try to do my day job. So I'm feeling both excited and anxious about the end of the school year. That would be my share this morning. Darcy is working toward her degree. She completed a difficult class and got 99%. Darcy, that's fantastic. I'm so glad to hear that. Wow. And I am assuming you have many things on your plate as well. So that 99 is something to celebrate. Crystal's son is graduating high school on Saturday, college in the fall. Yikes. Crystal, I hear you. I have one launching her college career as well. That is a mixed bag of emotions. Brittany's husband got a new job. I didn't realize, Brittany, congrats. So our family's excited for him, but anxious at the change. Oh, Brittany, don't go too far away. We need you around here. But I'm excited for your family's change as well. So everyone's getting the idea. Keep those rolling in if you want to. The idea is it's real quick and easy to build community in your classes, help people to feel seen and heard if they want to be. Give people an opportunity to let you know what's going on. It can be public with the whole group like this. It can be private and personal with a slip of paper or an email, just inviting people to share what's going on in their lives can really give you an insight into how people are doing. Oh, here's one more. Anita on the social wedge of the wheel. Her best friends moved to Atlanta, so she's sad for that loss, but she gets to visit in July. So she's happy for that. And July will be here before we know it. Thanks, Anita, so much for sharing. I'm glad for your visit too. All right. So we're making friends in our session today. Tina's working on making 2 big work-related projects happen, feeling overwhelmed and hoping to have enough energy to pull everything off. So everyone send your energy to Tina, whatever energy you have left, because we're all feeling busy this time of year, aren't we? So good luck on that, Tina. So we also want to acknowledge not only the people on the line, but where we're presenting from today. I'm in Peoria, Illinois. I'm right in the middle of the state. I really love this new tradition of acknowledging the land that we're sitting on, even for a virtual presentation. So today's presentation is actually from the traditional lands of the Peoria tribe. So we just pause right now to honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it. We recognize and respect that relationship as it exists between Indigenous peoples and this land. I love pausing to do that and grounding ourselves in where we are today. I'm thrilled to see you again super fast, and because some of you may have been with us before. My background is firmly rooted in education for the past 20 years or so, and that has spanned all levels from the littlest of kiddos to adult education. Most of my time in Co-12. So I've taught, I've been an administrator, I've done professional development, I've done research, I've done consulting with state departments of ed. And that's what brings me to you today. I pause on this because I think it's important to acknowledge that I do not have a certified or trained mental health background. I do have training in mental health first aid, which is a different thing. And I utilize that as a volunteer following emergency situations with an organization called NOVA. I am not a counselor. I am not a mental health provider. Professionally, I am not a psychologist. I am not a psychiatrist. I am not a social worker. So I want to make sure we make that clear that today we're really speaking through the purview of an educator, and that's the lens that I approach you with today. I'm also approaching you with the lens of a parent. So when we talk about mental health, I don't know about you, but I have enough material in my own family to leave me curious and committed as well. So just sharing my background. Today, I'll be facilitating, hopefully, an ongoing conversation with us all. And I'll respect our time and try to follow up on inquiries. What I ask of you is to tune in as much as possible and be present as much as possible and really dig in and try to learn from and respect the input of others. So again, we touched base already with this wheel. I was just pausing to see if anything else had rolled in. Seeing nothing, we dive into our content for today. Our goals remain the same as the past two sessions. We're really overviewing, we're kind of a million miles up, mental health considerations in our classrooms. Hopefully there'll be opportunities to go deeper later. We're clarifying as we go, what can I do as an instructor? When do I refer on to others? And today we're really going to get into practices to promote skills and resilience in our students and ourselves, because we all know the stress levels are high, the stressors are abundant. Stress can be chronic and ongoing and really start to create a problem, especially for the learning process. So we start with focusing on this idea of stress. We've also talked, and we won't go into too much depth today, that there are resources available through ICSPS regarding trauma. That some of the stress we are bringing to us is actually a traumatic stress, a traumatic response to something that we've experienced. And that experience has really overcome our ability to cope. So that's when we stop speaking about stress and start speaking about it more as trauma, when that ability to cope is really hindered and we are left in an elevated state, almost as if we're continually encountering that trauma. This is closely related to and can actually lead to anxiety. But anxiety comes from many sources and manifests in different ways. But this is really worry and concern about what could happen in the future, worst case outcomes, getting fixated on those types of things. And we see this a lot in an academic setting, even regarding the academic endeavors. Students get anxious about what we need to be learning and how we're learning it, but we can be anxious about a whole slew of things. So anxiety is something we talked a lot about last time. We also talked a bit about depression. These things can be related as well, but that prolonged low feeling of sadness, that nothing seems to help over an extended period of time. And a lot of these symptoms can seem similar, no matter what the kind of a label that we're using might be, but certainly symptoms of suicide can look more or less severe and really lead us to worry about someone's well-being. So that was not even any kind of treatment of those disorders, concerns, or situations. That's just leading us up to the types of things that we've heard in our previous sessions that we're seeing in classrooms. And this is, of course, backed up by tons of data. And we won't spend a lot of time building up to what we really know to be true. But even before pandemic, And this study looked specifically at college students of all ages, anyone enrolled in a post-secondary program. And even pre-pandemic, 57% of respondents reported feeling overwhelming anxiety. 39% reported they felt so depressed it was difficult to function at times. That was up from 36% just 2 years prior. So we're seeing this rise. And 1 in 10 of our post-secondary students indicated that they had seriously considered harming or attempting suicide during the previous year. The numbers for self-harm are actually even greater. So then we know what we've been through the past 3 years. We have talked a lot about this at length in previous sessions, but acknowledging pandemic, acknowledging poverty that's been exacerbated by pandemic, acknowledging social issues and prejudice and all of these things that our students are dealing with on a day-to-day basis in big and small ways, leads us to what we also can intuit to be true, that these mental health concerns are on the rise. This particular WHO study showed 25% increase in depression, 28% increase in anxiety during that first year of the pandemic. So again, that can sound doom and gloom, that can leave us feeling heavy. We also, in our sessions, really focus on this concept of resilience, and that as humans, we are innately equipped to an extent to make the most of the protective factors around us and to overcome these challenges. So we want to definitely keep that as a lens on as we speak. Caring and supporting relationships and caring and supportive environments are incredibly important in building this resilience, as well as our own internal belief systems, cultural systems, and how in control we feel over our scenarios. So when we think about those supportive relationships and supportive environments, that post-secondary learning setting plays a huge role for people, and we can feel very empowered in our role as educators. Because as educators, we're looking at this progression, right? We want wellness for the sake of our students, because we care about them, but also because that's going to impact their motivation to learn, their engagement with the material, and ultimately the extent to which they're successful in their learning. So we're going to focus on this classroom instructor level, realizing and acknowledging that mental health concerns in our institutions require a range of interventions, sometimes more intense and individualized, sometimes more universal. How can we help everyone and have an even greater impact on those struggling with mental health concerns? So that universal level is where we're really going to focus today. And we used this science analogy before, the role of conductor and versus the role of catalyst, and how there's a time and a place for all of it. Speaking as a conductor, we allow things to kind of flow through us as instructors, right? If we attune that there's an issue going on. But to do that, we have to be aware and care about what's happening with our students. We won't know everything going on in their lives. It's not appropriate or our job to try to find out everything that's going on in their lives, but we may become aware just in the relationship that we build with our students. We want to be attuned to those changes and behavioral warning signs as much as possible. And if someone comes to us, and talks to us about their ongoing concerns, we want to know where to go from there. So we want to be aware of resources in the institutions in which we work, and then share information about those institutions verbally, visually, and via the syllabus, explicitly sharing that information of where to go to get help. Now, let's pause on this idea. If someone approaches you or the relationship is appropriate for you to express to a student, hey, I'm noticing a big change, is everything okay? That can lead to a conversation where people are disclosing what they're struggling with. If you find yourself in a conversation in that regard, there are some ideas to keep in mind from the experts, so to speak. First, that it's powerful just to explicitly express that you care. Thank you for telling me this. That must be very challenging. We can also normalize, you are not alone. I know there are others dealing with this. Here are some resources to help. You can separately, and this is, I think, an interesting point, address this idea of well-being and academics, because when those are too closely intertwined in these conversations, it can create more anxiety, and it's not reinforcing what we want to, which is that your well-being, this person in front of you, your student, is valued regardless of the performance. So we don't want to just keep coming back to grades and marks and those types of things. We want to really focus on what someone's sharing with us about their overall well-being. But as we do so, not overpromise. We can't promise that they'll be exempt from academic expectations. We can't promise that will be completely confidential versus just being discerning, because we do have different types of requirements as far as reporting abuses and things like that. So we don't want to overpromise in any way. And we also don't want to step outside of our roles. We are instructors versus emotional support that's ongoing, or a therapist, or we are certainly not qualified to make diagnoses. Again, we're pointing to resources. And here's an idea I've thought a lot about lately. Often it's natural for us to want to relate and empathize by sharing our own backgrounds, our own stories, our own struggles. This can be very well intended, but sometimes not be what the student needs. It can even alienate a student, especially if they feel that you have kind of a support system or resources that you're available that they don't. It can also just create discomfort if they weren't looking for that kind of disclosure. And we can also, once giving resources or pointing in the right direction, ask that student's opinion about when they would like us to check back in, or if they would like us to check back in. Would you like to keep touching base? Would you like to meet in a few days? Would you like to stop by after class next week? That type of conversation, so we know how and when and if follow-up is happening. So that's all I'm really going to say about those more intensive needs today. There are other trainings available to get more in depth for our people that provide those services. But back to the role of the instructor as a catalyst, we can be empowered because there are many things we can do just in our teaching role to help with mental health. And I realized a lot of this is review from last time. Last time we really dug into this idea of conditions for learning. Today, we're going to dive more into these succeeding three ideas: curricular design, really capacity building or competence building in a way that helps students not only be successful, but cope with their struggles, and also modeling care for self. So we're going to dive in now and dig into that content. But before I do, is there anyone who has a thought so far, questions so far, questions about last time before we dig into some new ideas? I'll watch the chat, or you can raise your hand. And if we don't have questions, we'll move on. Okay, like I said, feel free to chime in with those at any time. So again, last time, conditions for learning, we talked about creating safety in physical, intellectual, social, and emotional ways, the importance of relationships, and the things that we do in class, the routines we have, the way we do things that can create a safe environment for all students, especially those who are dealing with mental health concerns. So again, revisit that last session for more detail on that, but we're going to become a little bit more specific today, starting with this idea of being very intentional around the design of curriculum. So really weaving in our considerations about well-being, mental health, and academic success. So big ideas about curricular design. Are we being flexible? So there's lots of different ideas about what flexibility can look like. And from instructor to instructor, classroom to classroom, we see different philosophies and different approaches to this, right? So the big question being, how do we maintain the learning objective, never lowering our standards or our expectations, but allowing flexible paths as much as possible to get there? So we're really promoting student success so that they can show us what they know and what they can do. At the same time, recognizing our own limits for our own work and our own preparation and what we can do, being smart about this so that we adopt ways of doing things that don't necessarily mean a list of more to-do things on our list. Anticipating barriers really is what this intentionality is all about. So not just looking at the student, but looking at the environment. How is the environment or the way we're doing things creating barriers for all learners, and especially more so for some? And then taking that intentional approach to learning objectives and being thoughtful about workload. When is the work really leading toward the goal and necessary? When can it be a little bit maybe evaluated to be less necessary or alleviated. So again, students can really realistically tackle everything we ask them to do with fidelity and do their best on it, and not just feel like they're doing halfway work because the workload is great. We know there's a relationship between academics and mental health, and it's really bi-directional. So in the research, students report that academic distress, right alongside social anxiety, is really top of their mental health concerns. At the same time, respondents identify stress, anxiety, sleep difficulties, depression as the top 4 impediments to their learning. So we see this cycle, right, where academic work is really woven into the mental health experience of our learners. But if we're always keeping our focus on students and their variability, the way that they're unique, the way that they differ, talking about their strengths and abilities and disabilities and challenges, their identities, their backgrounds, their experiences, their cultures, races, genders, how they identify in numerous ways, we want to keep all that diversity in mind, right? So another way of thinking about neurodiversity is thinking about some of these things that students bring with them to the classroom, whether it be learning disorders, whether it be mental health concerns, whether someone comes to you and says, look, I really am excited to do well in the class, but this is what you need to know about the anxiety that I deal with. We want to weave all of that into our thoughts around designing curriculum, because really by focusing on that learner variability and approaching variability as the norm, that we don't have students with special needs and everyone else. We have a spectrum of student needs in our classrooms. We can, again, be very intentional about building flexibility into our design. So we talked last time about universal design for learning as one model, one framework that can help us be thoughtful about how to build flexibility and alleviate barriers in our curricular design. So we're actually going to dive a little deeper into this one framework, this one model, to illustrate what we're talking about, how our curricular design can be helpful to our students who are battling mental health issues. So just a minute or two of review around UDL. This is a brain-based framework, really getting into three networks of the brain, this affective network that they call it, the why we learn, having to do with engagement and motivation. The what of learning, we talk about the recognition network of the brain. So building in variability and flexibility about how we represent knowledge to be consumed by our learners. And the how of learning based in the strategic network of the brain. So how can people take action on and express their learning? And we start to think about these things when we think about assessing learning. How do we know what people know and can be able to do? So keeping in mind that we're brain-based here, we're speaking neurologically, we're looking at these 3 big ideas: engagement, representation, and action. UDL, as developed by the organization CAST, this one framework, provides a scaffolding of checkpoints in these 3 categories toward the end goal, which are certain attributes of learners that we're shooting for, right? We're shooting for purposeful and motivated learners in regard to this aspect of engagement. We're looking for resourceful and knowledgeable learners, strategic and goal-directed learners, and every single one of us is progressing toward these attributes, right? We're all learning, we're all getting there, we're all making progress. So UDL provides this kind of roadmap of checkpoints to get there. Now, I know you cannot read that fine print. So what we're going to do is look at each of these aspects of curricular design one at a time in a simpler, easier to read version. This is actually a hot linked version that I put in my slides so that people can click right to resources for each of these ideas. But we're going to go through one by one, starting with engagement, and just kind of take a look at some of examples of how your curricular design and doing so in an inclusive and flexible way can really help those who are dealing with things like stress, anxiety, depression. So let's just look at one. Let's look at one of these checkpoints, one of these areas of consideration. And I definitely present UDL and a list of considerations as opposed to a to-do list, which is very different. But this is a resource of reference. If you're thinking about doing something differently and more inclusively, you can come here and find it in a checkpoint and learn more. So let's take a look. Thanks, Brittany. Brittany is putting a link to UDL resources in the chat for us. So let's look at this one idea related to how people learn, and click on this idea of minimizing threats and distractions. What does that look like in a classroom? Well, when we break it down, we're talking about the supportive atmosphere and climate. We're talking about being intentional and thoughtful around novelty and risk. A lot of our students who are dealing with mental health concerns need a certain level of predictability in the classroom, or they may need a certain level of novelty and how to walk that balance. Sensory stimulation can become a big deal when you're talking about trauma and other things that really hijack the thinking part of our brain and make us more reliant on kind of the more primal survival parts of our brains. So that's happening for a lot of our students in classrooms, and learn more about that in the trauma sessions. But thinking about sensory stimulation, what's too much, what's too little, thinking about the pace of the work, the length of the work, how to build in breaks, the timing and sequence of activities, all of this is brain healthy, being intentional. Now, we're not talking about making things easier, dumbing things down, slowing down. We're talking about intentionality. And then thinking about social demands for the learning performance and how much support is given around that. Is there advance notice given around that? Can people mentally prepare for that type of thing? These are just examples of things to be intentional about in our curricular design that will be great for all students, but be even more helpful for those who are dealing with mental health concerns. So that had to do with engagement. Let's pick on one little checkpoint, one example having to do with how we represent the material in class. Let's look at this idea of highlighting patterns, critical features, relationships. So we always talk about keeping the work where the work belongs, right? That the point is not to have puzzles and tricks and make our students work really hard to figure out what's important. The point is to help them to learn and maintain in their knowledge what's really important, right? So this idea of highlighting and emphasizing key elements, using organizers and strategies to help make things super clear as far as relationships and the content, using examples to emphasize these relationships, to emphasize critical features, cues and prompts to draw attention to these things, highlighting skills that we've learned to date to apply toward unfamiliar problems. So these are instructional strategies, right? These are also things that are really going to help someone who's feeling anxious about the academic work, for someone whose brain and mind and thoughts are distracted because of stressors in their life, for someone who's feeling down or depressed and really having a hard time digging deep to engage and be successful in the learning. These are things that are going to have a positively disproportionate impact on those learners. So this is the empowering part, right? This is where good teaching is also helping in mental health. So let's look at this one last category before we kind of pause for some discussion. Now let's talk about action and expression. How do we allow and facilitate the students expressing what they know? I'm going to hone in on this one idea, checkpoint 6.4, about, I clicked my hot link there. Let me get our presentation back, everybody. I made my presentation a little too smart. All right, we're going to look at my notes instead on this idea of enhancing capacity for monitoring someone's own progress. Do we build in room for this self-monitoring, self-reflection of one's process and one's progress? Do we show how to do that? Do we prompt learners to identify the type of feedback or advice that they need and how to get it? Do we provide templates or models for that? Differentiated models of self-assessment. Do we build that into the curriculum so that learning is something that students are doing, and that they're taking the reins on, not something that's being done to them? Because one, that kind of empowerment, autonomy, that sense of control for people who might feel that lots of aspects of their lives, including their own mental health, are out of control at the moment. Building that sense of self-ownership, self-reflection, and control can be very powerful. Again, an instructional strategy that's going to lead to hopefully better learning outcomes for students who are struggling. Let's go to the chat now. Feel free to chime in. Let's start with this idea from Amy. She said there's much discussion of scaffolding, but I fear many students expect to learn everything from bullet points up, I hear you, Amy, and PowerPoint slides. So how to highlight patterns and critical features, but also foster students to learn how to do their own scaffolding, to read the complex text, to analyze them, to learn to write synopses on their own. Key for lifeline learning. I am so glad you brought this up, Amy, because I am right on board with you as a lifelong educator, and probably neglected to make explicitly clear that we still need this process, right? They need to learn how to learn, do all those things that you articulated so eloquently, to engage in the deep, complex text, to analyze and to come up with their own conclusions and their own ability to say, this is a big idea. So it's a balance, right? It's allowing them to engage in that process. And then also as we come in and kind of bring everybody onto the same page, making explicitly clear when we can, this is a big idea, this is a big thing. So thank you, Amy, allowing folks to do that on their own and also providing scaffolding on the backside, you know, after engaging with this process, to really helping with their organization of their thoughts. The reason we talk about this in a mental health session is because we know with the brain that often when we're dealing with mental health concerns or issues, that prefrontal cortex, our organizing and thinking and rational part of our brain, is not functioning the way it might otherwise, is not functioning the way that we need. So we figure out how we can be helpful, again, not robbing from students the process of engaging with the material and doing their own scaffolding and learning as well. So thank you for adding balance to that conversation, Amy. Any other thoughts in general around these examples or others of how being thoughtful and intentional about an inclusive curricular design can really help students who are struggling with anxiety and other mental health concerns? Maybe there's something you've done in your own classes, your own learning groups that has been successful. So let's pause just for a moment on this idea. If anyone has anything else to add. Tina has raised her hand, so let's figure out how to get in touch with Tina.
Here, Tina, I'm going to allow you to talk, so you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hi, I work in the Center for Accessibility and Neurodiversity at Illinois Valley Community College. So I'm not necessarily an instructor, but I work with a lot of students and talk a lot about curriculum. We're doing a faculty summer institute next week, and I'm doing a session on cognitive load and having a discussion about that. And I tend to go down rabbit holes, but I find that to be so important when we think about, you know, what's intrinsic to the task that we're trying to teach and how much is extraneous and how much stress and distraction does the extraneous stuff add to what we're really trying to do. So I just wanted to jump in with that because it's not a conversation that we have regularly here. I wonder if other people have that, and I feel it's very germane to, you know, helping students learn better, especially those who have, you know, maybe some different challenges when they come to the classroom.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Tina. I'm so grateful for that. We're going to touch on these ideas as we go today too. I'm tempted, knowing your role, to yield the rest of my time because I think you have so much that you could share with us and teach us. And thank you for being here today. But this idea, yes, of cognitive load, and those require us as instructors to ask really tough questions, right? When we are dealing with an abundance of material and it can be too much, it can be overloaded. Where do we make choices? What are the tasks that are crucial and critical? Always going back to very clear and concise learning objectives. If it doesn't trace back and fully facilitate the learning objective that we've articulated, is it the right time and place for this, or can it go? So again, this is balance, not talking about lowering expectations, not talking about making things easier, but talking about what is critical to the learning and what is not, and asking those tough questions, especially when it requires us to give up some of our favorites, some of our favorite activities, some of our favorite readings, some of our favorite stories to share. You know, that can be tough as instructors, but focusing in on those learning objectives and what's exactly pertinent, keeping in mind, not only do our learners have our courses, they have their other courses, and often we're not in communication with their other instructors about the ebb and flow of work there. They also have their day jobs, they also have their families, they also have their responsibilities. So it's true for all of us, right? But being really intentional about that cognitive load. I'm grateful that you brought that concept to us, Amy. Anything else on that before we move on? Okay. All right. Big idea, big rock. Being intentional about curricular design is going to help our students who are dealing with mental health concerns. What's another big rock? What's another big idea? Sometimes we are more explicitly capacity building, competency building in ways that are helpful too. So this is our business, right? We build competency, we build skills, we share knowledge, we even help to form dispositions around learning, right? So how can we integrate academic learning, social and emotional competencies, and mental health coping skills in a way that, you're going to get sick of me saying this, help all students, but have an even greater positive impact on those struggling with anxiety and mental health concerns? And I use that phrase, that's a general phrase that catches a lot of things. And I know it's too vague, but that'll allow us the time to dig into some of these strategies today. So let's talk about social and emotional learning. We don't always talk about this in a post-secondary sense. I've spent a lot of career time on SEL, social and emotional learning, in a K-12 setting, but nationally, we're seeing more and more attention to this in a post-secondary setting, in adult education, for our older learners. So the truth is, we know social and emotional learning can't be extricated from academic learning. Like, all learning is social and emotional to its core, if we really think about it. And so Timothy Schreiber with CASEL, the Consortium on Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, had this quote, and it's online. I've also heard him say this in meetings because I've served on the board for CASEL with him. That emotion drives attention and attention drives learning. So let's just kind of acknowledge there are social and emotional aspects to what we do. SEL is so firmly rooted in the research, and I always go back to my favorite study, this one in 2017, specifically this second point about the increase in academic learning that came along with really intentional social and emotional learning. So to be clear, this meta-analysis had to do with studies conducted in the K-12 primarily system. So I want to be clear about that. But we're seeing new research that shows the impact academically and otherwise post-secondary. Also showing impacts in our lives around behavior and the trouble that we do or don't get into and the positive or negative attitudes we have. But I'm honing in on that idea that SEL is really a game changer in regard to academic success. So CASEL, that organization I was just talking to, breaks down social and emotional competencies in this way, these 5 core competencies. You'll see it broken down in lots of different ways. There's no one right way, but we can focus on these competencies for our discussion today. And you'll see these aren't values, these aren't ideas about the world, these are skills, right? Having to do first and foremost with your own self-awareness and how you manage your thoughts, your emotions, dealing with how we, extend to interact with others. So being aware socially, and then really building those skills that we need for healthy, sustaining relationships. And then even extending beyond that to how we make decisions in our relationships and in our broader society that are responsible and helpful and functional. So we're talking about skill building. Well, what can that look like in a post-secondary setting? I think I could provide you with a list of what some instructors are saying they do, or we can kind of go through each of these competencies one by one, and you can feel free to chime in the chat, or you can just think and reflect to yourself. When you look at these lists of itemized skills, how are you promoting them in your classrooms? Because I bet you're doing a lot of this intuitively as good instructors, because you know this is kind of the gray matter that your students need to be successful on that assessment or that project or that discussion. So I bet you're doing a lot of this, but looking at these skills, how are you promoting these skills? Being in tune with their own emotions and analyzing them, recognizing their own strengths and where they can use help or assistance, being realistic about those things in their learning process, right? Identifying what help do you need, what feedback do you need in the learning process, and then how does that build self-efficacy, self-esteem. So again, if you have thoughts on how you are doing this or how you could do this, how you promote these things in your classrooms, feel free to chime in. Moving on to the core competency of self-management. Are we allowing students the opportunity to really take ownership of their learning, set their plans, work toward their goals, maybe identify their own obstacles and how to overcome them with strategies, monitoring their progress, and along the way, regulating their discomfort with the learning process, their frustrations, maybe aggressions, behaviors, managing that personal trust and their intention, trying to tap into motivation, hope, optimism, using that feedback well and accepting that, advocating for themselves, persevering. These are all great things we want to see, and we do see in our classrooms, right? But being thoughtful about how we can promote them is helpful. Again, extending to social awareness, being respectful and aware of others' perspectives, evaluating those things, even predicting others' responses. How do they share feedback with their peers or with you as the instructor in a constructive way? Appreciating diversity along the way. You see this differently than I do, but I can value that. Like, these are lifelong goals that we're working on, right? And how to identify and use resources that are in the form of people. Dana says she finds it difficult to visually see how they're doing emotionally with masks during the pandemic. Isn't that true? So much of our kind of detective work that we do to see how folks are doing is visual and based in the face. So masks made it really tough. It also makes it really tough when we're in a format like we are right now, where we're not seeing each other at all. We're hearing voices and we're looking at a screen. We've been doing that with remote learning during these past couple of years. Some of us are still in the thick of that. So that's a really good point, that we have to be even more savvy about language and communication, whether written or verbal, when we're trying to figure out how people are doing. And when you acknowledge that, Dana, you then think, okay, how can I help equip my students to recognize this is hard? You're going to have to try extra hard and maybe do these things. So a couple more competencies to get through. This idea of how we manage or engage in our relationships extends from that social awareness. Again, managing and expressing our own emotions and how we deal with others, how we communicate effectively, how do we help or seek help? How do we develop this into leadership in a group? You know, when we're doing this group work in class, are we setting people up for success? Are we first explicitly talking about skills that are needed to work in a group? Are we explicitly talking about the roles each person will take, how they'd like to communicate, how to set norms in the group, how to disagree without being disagreeable, how to come to shared consensus on things? Are we pausing in our instruction and really explicitly mentioning those or talking about those skills and modeling those skills before we say, here's your group assignment, go at it? That's what we're doing, just talking and pausing on how we can do these things. Again, leading to this ultimate goal of responsible decision making. This may extend beyond our classroom. There may be opportunities for this within our classroom, but really approaching problem solving with those fundamental skills that we just covered as the building blocks for how you engage in a problem, in dealing with others, in making decisions, and that type of thing. So we just went through a lot of bullet points. Are we dizzy? again, with the idea of how are you or how could you explicitly acknowledge and model and provide ability to build these skills. Maybe it's built into your assignments. So that was a framework used a lot around the nation. Here in Illinois, post-secondary institutions have come together to frame this in regard to employability skills. Because there's the soft skills that we know are really hard and difficult that employers are looking for. So this is just another example of a framework. How are we integrating these things? Because these things are going to be, again, even more important for someone that's having to tune into their own mental health struggles, their own coping mechanisms, their own awareness of how this is impacting them, and their ability to engage in the material. So how do we do this? How do we integrate SEL? This one is this idea of explicit competency building based on the competencies we just talked about or others. There's this other idea of SEL being embedded naturally into the academic content. So maybe if you're especially teaching social sciences or service professions or anything like that, there's just content that encompasses social and emotional awareness and learning, but also embedding it into the process. And again, an example of that is if you're doing group work, are you building that up for success by teaching the social emotional awarenesses? There are also just good instructional practices that innately support SEL, and this comes from research. So as you're teaching and you're doing these great things intuitively, or you're just really making a conscious effort to do these things, you're going to, one, promote social and emotional learning, and in effect, by doing so, help your students who are struggling with their own mental health. So incorporating these things, we've talked about several of them already, is helpful. Whether it's your very conscious language that affirms that you believe in your students' ability to be successful, that you're warm and approachable. Building in choice and responsibility, again, very powerful for those who may not feel like they have a lot of control in other aspects of their life. Building in those chances to build relationships, cooperatively learn, have class discussions and share, being intentional about how you do that and make sure everyone is included. Those chances for self-reflection and assessment, because guess what? If they're doing it academically, that's going to set the model for them to do it for other aspects of their well-being and their health and their life. Making sure we get out of the way and take a more facilitative approach sometimes that empowers students along with the very necessary direct instruction, keeping those high expectations and modeling all of these competencies around feedback and growth and trying to do better. Because again, they're going to apply that in other parts of their lives. Adopting this growth mindset, maybe some of you have been reading Dweck as an author in this regard and others, that you can normalize and even celebrate productive struggle in the classroom. It is okay. I know you're struggling. It is part of the learning process. We are there with you. How can I help? Turn to a peer. Can they help you? Can you help them? How can we engage in this struggle and be comfortable in this struggle together? Again, Amy was talking earlier about the need to engage and not have everything scaffolded for you. And that can be frustrating and difficult, right? So really diving into that with students and promoting their agency with the power of yet. No, you haven't accomplished this yet. You're not an expert on this yet. You have not achieved your goal yet, but you will, and I'm here with you to help. As an instructor, knowing too, we're talking about the brain. We know sometimes we need to pause, cognitive overload. It's real. We need to breathe. People need to move. They need to stretch. We need to reflect. We need to think metacognitively on our own thinking and learning. How is it going so far? What do I need to do different? What can you do for me differently? And as an instructor, we're open to that kind of feedback. So building in brain breaks, allowing people to breathe and move and stretch and talk and shift their brain. It's hard to do when we feel like there's a lot to cover. I have not done a good job of it this hour because there's a lot to cover. And how do we build these things in to be brain friendly when our brains are already overloaded in ways that are manifesting in real mental health concerns? Now, if an intense mental health moment happens for ourselves, for our students, There are strategies that we can utilize in the moment. I'm not saying you have to be an expert on this, but I include it in case the curiosity is there to learn more. Because if we can model and maybe even teach strategies like mindfulness and visualization and affirmations, that can help too. And that can be that grease in the wheel that allows the learning to keep happening because we're taking care of our health and well-being. Positive self-talk, breathing techniques, really imagining, muscular relaxation, one part of the body at a time, or just finding a friend to connect with and kind of regulating with them. Like, I know when I talk to this person, it kind of brings me back. We're just talking about how to incorporate these things into class for those who need it, or to at least be aware to support them if these are the strategies they're employing. If a student has the awareness and courage to let you know, you might see me really breathing deep in class. It's something I'm doing to help with my anxiety. We can at least be supportive, right? And acknowledge where that's coming from. All right, real quick pause on this idea of competency building and building skills that can help all students, especially those who are actively overcoming their mental health struggles every day. Thoughts, comments, questions before going into our last few minutes here together? Okay, last big idea of how we can be a catalyst for mental health as instructors in our classrooms is modeling care for self, right? How do we make self-care and mental health visible in the classroom, convey healthy attitudes, and be intentional, as we've talked about a couple times through this hour together, about the workload? We love to have self-care conversations about how to handle more, how to increase our capacity to take on more. It's much harder and rare to have conversations about how to just take on less and be realistic. Are we budgeting for time and energy and resources the same way that we would budget for money in our household or our business? Are we asking, of everything that I've listed in my syllabus that I'm so excited about because I know these are really valuable activities, is there the time and energy to do it with fidelity, realistically, so that people don't feel like they're doing it halfway and stressing about that too? So those are tough things to look at. But one fun way to start, can we consider a mental health assignment at the beginning of the course or reflected within? Are there skills that students are learning, and we can use this content as the vehicle, whether they're learning to give a presentation or create a brochure or give a presentation, this type of thing. Maybe they can do a reading, a reflection. Maybe they can promote by creating some kind of product, bring in a visitor. There are really helpful ways to be explicit about mental health. And I talked to an instructor who incorporated kind of this make a brochure assignment, where she didn't just kind of preach at the students about self-care. She said, why don't you make a brochure about what you do that's helpful? And she got a couple really cool examples that she shared. So yeah, make it visible. Also, just model yourself and the way you talk and the things you do. Are you prioritizing self-care? Are you, encouraging your students to do the same? One size does not fit all. Different strokes are going to work for different folks. Although there are things that are universal, right? Like health, food, movement, sleep. But we also know that there are brain tricks as well. We know that being grateful and thankful about things alters the chemistry in our brain and makes us feel better. I'm not saying that you're going to cure anyone's mental health concern with these practices, but they certainly aren't going to hurt. They're certainly going to help. And how do we model these things? They're talking about find 5 things that make you joyful. And just make room for that, whether it's your dog or nature or music or dance or Netflix. Make room for the things that are joyful, right? Because really, as an instructor, your role comes down to basic ideas. Care, I know you already do because you're given an hour of your day today. Be aware, that's what we're working on. This idea of flexibility, never lowering the learning expectations, but being flexible on how students need to get there, even if it has to do with flexibility in time, or flexibility in method, or flexibility in how many times somebody gets to revise. Is the goal the learning objective, and how can we get them there? And again, being that conduit of care, being that conductor that can point to resources. I've ended on this in previous sessions. I'm going to end with this again. We can all take a breath. I'm so grateful to all of you for not only being here, but contributing to the conversation. Even if those of you we haven't heard from, I know you're wrestling with this, you're thinking about it. Thank you for being here. Let me know if you have additional thoughts and questions. I know we're going to lose people because we're at the top of the hour, but if people can stick around and want to ask questions through the chat or verbally right now by raising your hand, please feel free to stick around, and I will as well. Here's Brittany's email as well in the chat. She is at the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support, and she is someone who can point you in a wealth of directions for a wealth of resources. She's also a wealth of information herself. So feel free to reach out to Brittany or to me. Thank you to everyone for the thank yous. Glad we could dig into the nitty-gritty of how good teaching helps our students' mental health today. And feel free to chime in now if you have other thoughts and questions. For those of you who don't, goodbye, and thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Shanna. I'm seeing a lot of thank yous, very informative, great session. Like Shanna said, I put my email address in there, and Shanna's is on the screen. Our center also just wrapped up a pretty in-depth webinar series on trauma-informed care. And so if that is also something that you are interested in, you can send me an email and I will direct you to where to find those recordings. We will be working more, it was done by ICOI, and so we'll be working more with them on the workforce side of things and maybe bringing them in onto the educational academic side as well, because we know, given even before the pandemic, we know that there was a lot of mental health awareness that needed to have taken place, but even especially now afterwards, it's very much a needed conversation to have. Yes, and Dana, for the trauma-informed webinars, if you want the link, because they're little, they're not all in one collected spot. So if you want to send me an email, which I put in, it kind of got a little lost, but I'll put it in there again. I will be happy to get those to you.
Yes, and I want to make sure to follow up with Robin about her question about teaching those social emotional skills or competencies to her students in the construction field. So Robin, we can either unmute you and chat now, or you can put your email in the chat box and I can follow up with you and we can have a conversation. Or maybe you just wanted to pose the question and see my initial thoughts. Yeah, social and emotional competencies with adults, and especially adults coming from the field and their industries and having to do and think and interact in new ways, is really an opportunity for learning. That's great. So Robin, I've got your email and I will follow up and we can chat. I've got a lot of thoughts about that.
Okay, well, thank you all so much. I know it's such a topic that I think all of us could probably sit here all day and discuss it, right? But I want to be respectful of your lunch breaks, get those bellies full, take your time away from your work for a moment to just de-stress. And thank you all so much for participating. And thank you, Shanna, for a wonderful session.
Thank you, everyone.